A night so cruel it almost felt alive, the kind of winter night that seems to bite at the soul itself. The wind tore through the town of Silverwood, Colorado, sharp as broken glass, while snow kept falling, heavy and endless, swallowing every sound. The little mountain park, once a place of laughter and strolling families, was now a wasteland of white silence. On one frozen bench, two newborn sisters lay curled together in a basket, their tiny bodies wrapped in nothing more than a worn thin blanket. Their small chests rose and fell faintly, their breaths already fading like candle flames about to go out. Their lips were bluish, their fragile hands stiffened by the cold. Beside them, there was no warmth, no mother's arms, only the echo of a desperate prayer whispered into the storm and left behind. No one was there to hear that prayer. No one, except a man and his dog. Officer Daniel Hayes, a weary but steady figure, walked the midnight path that cut through the park, his boots pressing soft prints into the snow. At his side trotted Ranger, his loyal German shepherd, alert to every shift of wind and scent. Together they moved like shadows, part of their town's quiet defense against a night that could swallow lives. This was supposed to be a routine patrol. Nights like these usually meant checking locks on shop doors, nodding to the plow driver humming old country songs, and tapping on cafe windows just to reassure the few workers still brewing coffee. Daniel's radio whispered the weather forecast. Nothing new. Just more cold and more snow. He exhaled clouds of white mist while Ranger's nose wrote invisible letters in the frozen air. But then Ranger stopped. Not with barking or growling. He simply froze. His ears pricked forward, his head tilted, his chest stiffened like stone. Daniel trusted him more than he trusted his own eyes in the dark. "Easy," he murmured, unclipping the leash with a practiced thumb. Ranger slipped away, paws cutting into the drifts, moving low and sure toward the benches that lined the creek. Daniel followed quickly, hand resting on his flashlight but keeping it dark because Ranger's instincts outshone any beam. The dog stopped at the second bench, a stone one, softened by a mound of snow. He stood tall, unmoving, like a sentinel that had found danger. Daniel stepped closer, his breath catching in his throat. There it was, a woven basket, rim crusted with frost. A ragged gray blanket barely covered the two smallest faces he had ever seen, their lashes tipped with ice, their tiny lips quivering. For a split second, Daniel's chest felt like it tore open, as if the sound of the snow itself had broken him. He dropped to his knees in the freezing drift, not caring that the cold cut through his uniform. With trembling fingers, he peeled back the top of the blanket and pressed two fingers gently to the chest of the child on the left. A faint flutter. A heartbeat, weak but alive. He shifted to the second baby. Her pulse was there too, but fainter, fading. Beside them, tucked at their feet, was a folded note, the paper wrinkled and damp. Daniel opened it quickly. The handwriting was small, tight, almost broken. "Please save my girls. I can't. Their names are Hope and Faith. God forgive me. God bless anyone who helps them." The last line was written twice, as though the first. Time hadn't carried enough strength. Daniel swallowed hard, the Marine in him, the officer in him, the man in him all snapping to attention at once. "We're okay," he said out loud, though the words were more for himself and Ranger than anyone else. He tore off his heavy patrol jacket, still hot from his own body, and wrapped it firmly around the babies, tucking every fold tight to keep the heat in. He didn't notice the cold now searing his own arms. All that mattered were the breaths, thin, fragile threads that could break at any moment. Ranger stood so close, Daniel could feel the warmth of the dog's breath against his sleeve. His steady presence anchored him. "Dispatch Hayes," Daniel said into the radio clipped to his shoulder. his voice steady only from long habit. "I've got 2 newborns. Severe exposure, probable hypothermia, conscious but weak. Requesting EMS priority, Creekside Park, North Bench. Will transport towards Silverwood Medical." He slid a hand under the basket, testing the weight. It was shockingly light, feather-like in a way that filled him with dread. Carefully, he lifted it, cradling the sisters as if any sudden move might shatter them. Ranger pressed close, almost guiding his steps back toward the path. Daniel angled the basket toward his chest, using his own body as a shield against the wind, his chin dipping low so his breath spilled over the blanket like a borrowed warmth. He spoke to them as he walked, words without meaning but heavy with presence. "I've got you, little ones. Stay with me. You're safe now. You're safe." The lamps along the path glowed faintly through the snow like tired moons. The cruiser waited at the trailhead, its roof dusted white. To Daniel, it looked like a strange angel, ungainly but ready. He eased the basket into the back seat, slid in beside it, and pulled his jacket tighter around the twins. The heater roared to life, filling the space with rushing air. Daniel unzipped his collar so the warmth of his own skin could add to the fragile fight for life. Ranger leapt into the footwell, sitting guard like a statue carved out of loyalty itself. His ears never flickered, his eyes never left the babies. Twice he leaned close, just enough to feel the faintest whisper of breath on his whiskers. Twice Daniel's chest clenched, remembering how it feels when lungs falter, then remembering relief when they do not. "Hang on, Hope," he said softly. "Hang on, Faith." Outside, Silverwood slept beneath its blanket of snow. Roofs sagged under the weight, doors creaked against the cold. The Black River wound quietly through the white. Ordinary lives lay dreaming, unknowing. Inside the cruiser, another kind of courage huddled under a patrolman's jacket, fighting to be warm enough, strong enough, alive enough to want the world, overdressed for the weather in a suit jacket. That had seen better kitchens. Lai's knee bounced. He liked to talk about opportunities like they were lost dogs. If you were fast and kind and had just a little rope, you could catch one. "You sure she's here?" Lyle asked. Travis smiled. "She doesn't have anywhere else." He flicked the ash again, then crushed the cigarette out too hard. A sif the ember had, offended him by existing. "She'll fold," he said, more to himself than the passenger, and drolled his neck until it clicked. "They always do." The heater in the truck rattled. Snow ticked against the windshield like thrown rice. Back on the highway, the hospital lights rose over the hill, a beacon rectangle pale and warm in the storm's throat. Daniel felt some hidden string inside him loosened by a fraction. He signaled out of Habiton, an empty road, and pulled into the ER bay, angling the rear door to the wind. He killed the engine and twisted toward the basket, releasing his seatbelt in one fluid move. "We made it," he said, voice roughened by relief. He scooped the bundle into his arms, his jacket around the blanket around the twins, heat wrapped in heat, and stepped into the night. Ranger hit the ground first, landing sure-footed, then fell into position, shoulder to knee as they crossed to the sliding doors. The doors read his approach and parted with a breath, spilling brightness and the antiseptic smell of urgent hope. A nurse at the desk looked up, eyes widening, hand already reaching for a call button. Daniel did not slow until he reached the counter. "2 neonates," he said, the word neonates shaking like a leaf in a strong mouth. "Found in the park. Names are Hope and Faith." The nurse was already moving, her voice lifting toward the unseen room beyond. People answered that call. Daniel looked down once more. The smaller of the two had a fist the size of a walnut. It flexed barely. Ranger stood at his side, damp snow melting along the notch of his ear. "Hold on," Daniel whispered to the basket. To himself, to the world that was always colder than it should be, until someone decided to be warm enough for 2. And then he followed the nurse into the light. The automatic doors of Silverwood Medical Center closed behind Daniel with a hiss, cutting off the icy night and replacing it with sterile warmth and fluorescent light. The hospital smelled faintly of antiseptic plastic tubing and burnt coffee, a combination Daniel associated with both hope and endings. His jacket still cradled the two fragile bodies, and he held them against his chest, as if gravity itself might try to steal them. A nurse at the triage desk sprang into action, her sneakers squeaking across linoleum. Within seconds, a small team in teal scrubs rushed forward with a warming bassinet and blankets heated under lamps. Daniel carefully laid the basket down, his hands reluctant to release the weight that had already carved itself into his memory. Through the sliding doors that led deeper into the ER came Mariah Cole, head nurse of pediatrics. She was 40, tall, with auburn hair pinned back in a bun that had long since loosened from the stress of the night shift. Fine lines framed her hazel eyes, the kind etched not only by time, but by grief. She had once carried her own child into this hospital, only to leave with empty arms. Since then, every infant she touched felt like both penance and a second chance. When Mariah saw the twins, her breath hitched. Their tiny chest rose and fell with effort, lips tinted blue. She swallowed, hard, blinking rapidly, then straightened her spine and began issuing instructions in a crisp, clear voice. "Warm IV fluids ready. Oxygen line here. We need vitals. Heart rate, temperature, blood sugar. Let's move." Daniel stepped back, his arms suddenly aching from the absence of weight. He felt Ranger nudge against his leg, the dog's fur damp with melted snow. Rears's gaze tracked the team, wheeling the babies into the neonatal wing, then had patted over to the glass door and sat squarely in front of it. His ears pointed forward, body taut, as if he had appointed himself a guardian of the threshold. Daniel remained standing, watching through the glass as Mariah placed one infant, Faith, on a warming pad, while another nurse held Hope against her own chest for skin-to-skin contact. The room was a ballet of urgency. Each movement practiced yet tender. Machines beeped quietly. Screens flickered with fragile numbers. Daniel's jaw tightened as he saw the digits falter, then slowly climb again. The scene pressed against memories he had buried deep. Years ago, another hospital room, another child, his daughter, barely a day old, had been born with a congenital heart defect. He had held her hand smaller than a thumbprint and promised he would never let her go. But promises couldn't compete with failing organs. Within hours, she had slipped away. That loss had driven him into long deployments, then into law enforcement, as if constant motion could keep grief from catching him. Tonight, though, watching Hope and Faith fight for air, the grief returned like a shadow. He pressed his palm against the cool glass, his voice low enough that only Ranger could hear. Not this time. They're not going to slip away. Ranger thumped. His tail once. Silent agreement. Inside the neonatal room, Mariah glanced toward the glass, her eyes locked with Daniel's for a moment, and she recognized the look. A man, both soldier and mourner, silently begging the universe to be merciful. She gave him a brief nod, professional, but warm, as if to say, "I'll fight with you for them." Hours bled into each other. Daniel didn't leave the quarter. He refused. Offers of coffee refused the suggestion to sit. Ranger lay stretched across the floor, eyes half closed but ears still flicking at every sound. Nurses passed, and some offering small smiles, some curious glances at the officer and his K9, who seemed carved into the hallway itself. As dawn began to tint the horizon a muted gray, Mariah emerged. She pulled down her mask, revealing the weary, but softened expression of someone who had just carried two souls a step back from the brink. "They're stable," she said quietly. "Hypothermia. Dehydration. It will take time, but they're strong. Stronger than they look." Daniel exhaled a breath. He hadn't realized he'd been holding. His shoulders sagged, relief flooding him. He crouched to scratch behind Rares's ears. "You hear that, boy? They're fighters." Ranger gave a small huff, pressing his head into Daniel's palm. Mariah lingered, studying him. She'd seen countless fathers in this hallway, some frantic, some detached. This man wasn't a father to these children, yet his eyes told a different story. He had already chosen responsibility. "What were they called?" she asked softly. "Hope and faith," Daniel replied, his voice cracked slightly. Their mother left a note. Something flickered across Mariah's face. Recognition? Perhaps even reverence. Then maybe that's what will carry them through. Across town in the sagging motel room, Rachel Monroe stirred awake from a shallow, fevered sleep. Her body ached, hollowed by childbirth, her abdomen still cramping, her chest leaking milk into the oversized sweatshirt she wore. The heater coughed out bursts of warm air, barely touching the chill. Rachel was 22, once bright-eyed with plans to study nursing. She had the steady hands of someone who liked to heal, the gentle smile of a woman who found joy in helping children at church daycare. But dreams could curdle when paired with the wrong man. Travis had been charming at first, broad-shouldered, dimpled smile, a mechanic with easy jokes. That charm had soured into late-night debts, whiskey breath, fists against walls, and sometimes her. She had wanted to leave many times. Pregnancy had chained her, hope had blinded her, and fear had gagged her. When the twins arrived, too soon, too frail, she realized she could not protect them. But maybe someone else could. She had left them with names and a prayer on that stone bench. And now she sat in the motel, gnawed by guilt. Her hands trembled as she traced circles over her stomach. She remembered the hospital textbook she once read in nursing school. Hypothermia, dehydration, neonatal mortality. She pressed her fist to her eyes and whispered, "Please, God, please let them live. Please forgive me." The door of the motel office banged open. Outside, Travis Doyle paced the parking lot, his breath steaming in the cold. At 29, Travis was all edges dulled by excess, hair grown shaggy, leather jacket cracked at the seams, eyes bloodshot from nights of gambling and losing. His good looks had been sanded down by anger. Beside him, two men loitered, one lighting a cigarette, the other kickings now off his boots. Travis jabbed a finger toward the office clerk, a thin man in his 50s with stooped shoulders and glasses, sliding down his nose. "You've seen her," Travis snarled. "Don't lie to me. She's mine." The clerk shook his head nervously, adjusting his glasses. I don't know who you're talking about. People come and go. I don't keep track." Travis slammed his palm onto the counter hard enough to rattle the bell. "Don't test me. If you're hiding her, you'll regret it." His voice was low, venomous, the kind that made smaller men fold. The clerk's eyes flicked toward the stairs leading to the upper rooms before darting away. It was only a heartbeat, but enough for Travis to catch. He grinned, ugly and sharp. Rachel upstairs heard the muffled threat through the thin walls. Her body went rigid, terror flooding her veins. She clutched the blanket tighter, every muscle screaming to flee. But her legs trembled under her weight. She knew Travis was close. Too close. Back in Silverwood Medical Center, Daniel stood with Mariah, reviewing the infant's charts. Hope and Faith were connected to IV drips, their tiny chest rising more evenly now. Ranger remained by the doorway, unblinking, a silent sentinel. Daniel touched the glass again. Whoever left them, she must have been desperate. Mariah followed his gaze, her eyes softening. Sometimes desperation isn't abandonment. Sometimes it's love in its hardest form. Daniel said nothing, but in his heart, he knew this was only the beginning. Morning light filtered weakly through the clouds above Silverwood. A pale sun smothered by the hang of winter fog. The town tucked between ridges and a frozen creek began to stir. Coffee shops grinding beans, trucks scraping snow from driveways, the rhythm of mountain life continuing as though nothing miraculous had taken place the night before. For Officer Daniel Hayes, however, the memory of two fragile breaths in a basket had already reshaped the world. He sat at his desk in the precinct, the woven geo from the park resting on the blot before him. The wicker edges were frayed, and faint frost still clung to the fibers. Hoon folded the note once more, tracing the desperate words with a callous thumb. Hope and faith. The handwriting trembled in places. The ink pressed so hard in others it nearly tore the paper. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, hearing again the wrasse of the newborns. Something about the letter gnawed at him, the precision of the names, the way the plea was repeated. It didn't speak of apathy. It spoke of someone with neither option. Chief Ernest Callahan entered the office, his heavy boots leaving a trail of melted snow across the floor. Callahan was in his late 50s, a barrel-chested man with thinning gray hair, deep crow's feet at his eyes, and a voice that carried command even when it was quiet. He had been sheriff of Silverwood for over 2 decades, balancing the roles of lawman and neighbor in a town where everyone knew each other's children and debts. "You were up all night?" Callahan remarked, lowering himself into the chair opposite Daniel. His tone was half concern, half statement of fact. Daniel nodded. "Couldn't leave them. They're stable now. Barely." The chief studied the GEO, his brow creasing. "What are you thinking?" "That whoever left them wasn't careless," Daniel replied. "She wanted them found. This basket, the note, it's too deliberate." Callahan leaned back, folding his thick arms. "Or it could be part of something uglier. We've heard whispers of folks moving babies paying debts with flesh. Might be tied to those circles." His gaze hardened. "If that's true, we can't wait. We need to know where these twins came from and who's involved." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had thought the same, but hearing it aloud sharpened the urgency. "I'll start with the Geo. Someone in town sold it. It's not new." Within the hour, Daniel and Ranger were in his cruiser, the GIO secured on the passenger seat. The streets of Silverwood were lined with modest storefronts, a hardware store, Adener, a thrift shop. He stopped at Maybell's General Goods, a cluttered shop that sold everything from canned peaches to woven baskets. The bell over the door jingled as he entered, Ranger padding in at his heel. Behind the counter stood Maybell Grant, a widow in her 70s with a spine still straight despite arthritis. She wore a thick cardigan buttoned wrong at the middle and glasses on a chain that swung as she moved. Her hair was a crown of silver curls in her eyes, though tired. Missed nothing. "Morning, Officer Hayes," she greeted, voice warm but weary. "And Ranger, too, handsome boy." "Morning, Maybell," Daniel said, placing the Geo on the counter. "Did this come from here?" She leaned forward, peering over her glasses. Her fingers knotted from years of work. "Traced the rim. Yes, that's one of mine. Woo a few like it myself years ago before the arthritis stole my grip. But this one, I sold it last week to a girl." Daniel's pulse quickened. "Can you describe her?" Maybell nodded slowly, summoning the memory. Thin little thing. Dark hair pulled into a bun like she was trying to hide it. Eyes down most of the time. But when she looked up, Lord, here ye's were tired. Too young to look that worn out. Bought the basket. Asked for a discount. Paid in crumpled bills. She was shivering, though I don't think she noticed. Alone? As far as I could see, Maybell's voice softened. She thanked me 3 times before leaving, like the basket was more than it was. Daniel's chest tightened. He knew then the mother wasn't a ghost story. She was a living, hurting woman. After leaving the shop, Ranger tugged at the leash as they passed an alleyway near the edge of town. his nose pressed to the ground, tail stiff. He barked once, a sharp, commanding sound. Daniel followed, letting the dog lead. The trail wound toward the outskirts to a sagging, abandoned cabin crouched under pines. Its windows were boarded and the roof sagged with snow. The door gave with a groan when Daniel pushed it. Inside smelled of mildew and iron. Rares's ears cricked, his nose sweeping the floor until he stopped at a dark stain smeared near the wall. Blood nearby lay torn clothing. A woman's sweater ripped at the sleeve. On the floor, faint footprints dusted in dried mud led in erratic circles, small in size. Daniel crouched, studying them. His gut tightened. A woman had been here, frightened, possibly hurt. He scanned the room with his flashlight. Against one wall sat an overturned chair. Beside it, a baby bottle crusted with formula residue. The air felt heavier, charged with the ghost of desperation. He closed his eyes for a beat, picturing a young mother here, clinging to her infants, deciding against hope where to leave them safe. When he reported back, Chief Callahan listened grimly. "You may be right," the sheriff admitted. "She's not abandoning out of malice. But the other side of this coin, if men like Doyle are mixed in, and I'm betting they are, then this isn't just a sad story. It's criminal. We might be staring at a child trafficking line brushing up against Silverwood." Daniel's fist curled. "Then we stop it." Meanwhile, in the dim motel room, Rachel Monroe burned with fever. Her skin was clammy, her lips pale, and sweat slicked her temples. Each breath rattled shallow and fast. She curled on the bed, pulling the thin blanket around her shoulders, whispering between chattering teeth. "God, please keep them alive. Just them. That's all I have left." Her body ached from childbirth, but the wound in her heart was worse. She imagined two small forms in the cold. Prayed someone had found them. Prayed she hadn't killed them by leaving them to the mercy of strangers. Her own hunger gnawed, but she cared only for the fragile lives she'd birthed. In another part of town, Travis Doyle sat in a dim bar booth, a whiskey glass sweating in his hand, his dark hair stuck to his forehead, and a restless energy sparked in his movements. Across from him sat Ethan Vargo, a man in his late 30s with slick-back hair, a gold chain around his neck, and a smile that never touched his eyes. Ethan was a middleman in black market deals, housing, drugs, and sometimes the unthinkable. "You had twins?" Travis Ethan's tone was mocking, lips curling as he tapped ash from his cigar. "Do you know what a pair like that could fetch? You could wipe your debt clean and still walk out with cash." Travis's eyes darkened. "Rachel ran, left me with nothing. She had the brats and ditched them. I'll find her. And when I do," his voice trailed off, vibrating with rage. Ethan leaned back, smirking. "You'd better. My patience doesn't last forever." Travis drained his glass, slamming it down on the table. "She won't get far. She thinks she's clever, but she's weak. I'll drag her back if I have to." His words were poison, carried on whiskey breath. For Rachel, the net was closing. Back at the precinct, Daniel sat once more at his desk, Ranger lying at his feet, his hand rested on the go, eyes fixed on the evidence before him. Each clue painted a clearer picture. A young woman, desperate and cornered, forced into a choice no mother should have to make. And somewhere, predators circled, eager to profit. He swore to himself that he would not only protect hope and faith, but also find the mother who had risked everything to save them. The snow along Silverwood side streets had crusted into ice by the time Daniel eased his cruiser out of the precinct lot. Morning had sharpened into noon, and the sky held that flat Peter gray that seemed permanent in the mountains during winter. Ranger sat alert in the passenger seat, nose pressed lightly against the crack of the window, scanning the cold air with every inhale. On the seat beside Daniel lay a thin file the chief had handed him earlier. Travis Doyle, born and raised in Silverwood with a trail of broken promises that stretch from high school football glory to county arrest records, assault charges, one dismissed, one bargained down, multiple complaints of domestic violence, gambling. Debts with the Okanel crew, a local gang that traded in loan sharking and backroom fights. There was even a restraining order filed years ago by a woman named Lacey Stone, a waitress from the diner in town who claimed Travis had nearly strangled her in a drunken rage. Daniel flipped through the pages, his lips pressed thin. He wasn't surprised. Every instinct told him this was the kind of man who left wreckage behind him. What worried Daniel was that Rachel Monroe, whoever she was, had become caught in that wreckage. He parked near the abandoned cabin where Ranger had first picked up the trail. The snow crunched under his boots as they stepped inside again. The cold seemed thicker in the place now, silence settling in the corners like dust. Ranger sniffed methodically, circling the overturned chair and broken crib. Then his nose pressed to a scrap of paper half buried under debris near the wall. He pawed gently at it until Daniel bent down. It was a crumpled receipt from a drugstore in town. Formula. Prenatal. Vitamins ibuprofen. The date was barely 2 weeks old. Daniel turned it over in his hand, throat tightening. Whoever Rachel was, she had tried. She had bought what she could. She had intended to care for her children until circumstance made it impossible. She didn't want to give them up, Daniel murmured, more to himself than anyone. Ranger tilted his head, ears flicking as if he too understood. Daniel stood brushing dust from his gloves. She didn't abandon them. She was begging for help. He folded the receipt carefully into an evidence bag. The narrative in his mind had shifted. Rachel wasn't a reckless mother, but a desperate one. And desperate people left trails. They wanted to be found, even if fear made them hide. Across town, in a shabby apartment block on Hollow Pine Road, Rachel Monroe sat on the edge of a torn sofa, trembling. Her fever had broken into a damp chill that soaked her sweatshirt, and her body still ached from childbirth. Every breath felt like sandpaper scraping her lungs. The door slammed open. Travis filled the frame, his leather jacket dusted with snow, his eyes lit with fury. He moved fast, seizing Rachel by the arm and yanking her upright. "You thought you were clever?" he snarled, spit catching at the corner of his mouth. "You thought you could just run? Leave me with nothing?" Rachel's knees buckled under his grip. She tried to pull away, but his hold was iron. "Please," she whispered, voice ragged. "Please don't." Travis shoved her back against the wall, his face inches from hers, his breath reeked of whiskey. "You? Listen to me. You're done making choices. You'll come back with me, and if you don't..." He pressed his palm against her throat. Not enough to choke, just enough to promise it could come to that. "I'll finish this. All of it." Her vision blurred, tears pricking her eyes. In the pocket of her sweatshirt was a small torn piece of paper, the corner of an old envelope she had found on the floor. Earlier, while Travis had been out, she had scribbled a message on it with the stub of a pencil. "My name is Rachel Monroe. If you find this, please help me." He won't let May go. She forced herself not to reach for it now. She had folded it so small it felt like a pebble. If he searched her clothes, it might survive. If someone ever found her, maybe they'd find it too. In the apartment next door, Mrs. Elena Park, a 60-year-old widow of Korean descent with a kind face and a love of baking, was carrying a tray of rolls to her kitchen counter when she froze. Raised voices spilled through the thin plaster walls. A man's fury, a woman's frightened plea, the unmistakable thud of someone being shoved. Elena's hands trembled, and the tray rattled. She had lived in this building for 15 years, long enough to know Travis Doyle by name and reputation. She had seen him drunk, on the stairs, heard him curse loud enough to rattle windows. She had never interfered before. Fear had always kept her quiet. But tonight, the sound of Rachel's voice, horsaro and breaking, pierced something in her. She set the tray down, wiped her hands, and went to the phone. Her voice quivered as she dialed the sheriff's department. "This is Elena Park," she said. "There's trouble in the apartment next to mine. A woman's being hurt. Please, send someone." Back at the precinct, Daniel was pinning the receipt from the drugstore to a corkboard when the radio on his shoulder crackled. "Unit 12, we've got a disturbance call. Hollow Pine Apartments, possible domestic assault. Caller reports female in distress." Daniel straightened, adrenaline tightening his chest. He grabbed his coat and Ranger's lead. "Copy that. Unit 12 en route." As he drove, tires spitting slush onto the road, his mind replayed the receipt, the go, the desperate handwriting of the note. Hollow Pine wasn't far from where Ranger had found the traces. If the call was connected, and he felt certain it was, then Rachel Monroe might finally have a face and a voice. Ranger braced in the seat beside him, muscles tense, amber eyes sharp on the road ahead. Daniel tightened his grip on the wheel. "Hang on, Rachel," he muttered under his breath. "We're coming." Snow fell thick and fast over Silverwood as evening pressed down on the mountain town. The street lamps glowed with halos, but the alleys between buildings were dark, narrow cuts of shadow. The wind whistled through them like a warning, carrying scents of smoke, oil, and fear. Daniel Hayes moved quickly, boots crunching through the fresh drifts, one hand resting on the holster at his side, the other tightening on Rares's leash. The call from Mrs. Elena Park had guided him here to Hollow Pine Apartments and beyond. Witnesses had pointed toward a man dragging a woman out of the building, their argument spilling into the icy street. Daniel followed the trail into the warren of alleys behind town, Ranger pulling ahead, nose low, tail stiff with tension. At the far end of a snow-choked lane, Daniel finally saw them. Rachel Monroe staggered backward against a wall, her thin body framed by bricks and ice. Her sweatshirt hung loose over her fever-ravaged frame, damp with sweat and snow. Her long, dark hair had slipped from its bun, strands clinging to her face. She looked both fragile and fierce, her hands raised in trembling defense. Before her loomed Travis Doyle, his shoulders hunched beneath his battered leather jacket, his breath fogging as he spat words filled with venom. His jaw was tight, and his eyes glinted with a dangerous mix of alcohol and rage. He pressed closer, one hand clamped around Rachel's wrist, the other raised like a hammer. "You ruined everything," Travis hissed. "Do you think anyone's going to save you now? You're mine. You'll always be mine." Rachel's eyes widened in terror, her back scraping against the wall. She whispered through trembling lips, "Please, just let me go." Travis's hand drew back, ready to strike. That was the moment Ranger exploded forward. The German Shepherd lunged, a flash of sable fur and muscle, jaws clamping around Travis's forearm. The man howled, his fist collapsing into uselessness as Ranger shook, teeth locked with trained precision. He stumbled sideways, his grip on Rachel breaking. Daniel surged forward. "Ranger, hold." With practiced motion, Daniel caught Travis's other arm, twisted it behind his back, and slammed him down into the snow. The man thrashed, but Rares's growl near his ear froze his movements. Within seconds, cold steel clicked around Travis's wrists, handcuffs biting down tighter than any debt collector ever had. "You're done, Doyle," Daniel said, his voice low and steady. "You don't touch her again," Travis cursed, thrashing weakly. His eyes darted toward Rachel, a sneer curling his lip, but Rares's teeth bared inches from his throat kept him still. Rachel slid down the wall, her legs folding beneath her. She crumpled into the snow, sobs shaking her body. For a long moment, she couldn't look at Daniel, couldn't believe what she had just seen. "Rachel," Daniel said gently, moving closer. He crouched, careful not to overwhelm her while Ranger held Travis pinned. "It's over. You're safe now." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. No, I left them. My babies, they're gone." Her voice broke into raw anguish, hands clutching at her chest. Daniel reached out, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. His voice softened to a whisper, each word carrying weight. "They're not gone. Hope and faith are alive. They're at Silverwood Medical right now, fighting, waiting for you." Her breath caught, disbelief flashing in her eyes. She stared at him, trembling. "Alive? Alive?" Daniel repeated firmly. "They've made it this far. They're stronger than anyone thought. And now so are you." Rachel broke into sobs again, but these tears were different. She covered her face with her hands rocking forward, grief and relief colliding inside her. For the first time since leaving her children on that park bench, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps God had heard her prayers. Behind them, the wail of a siren cut through the night as backup approached. Travis cursed again, but the sound was hollow now. His power shattered in the snow. Daniel rose, pulling Rachel gently to her feet. She clung to his sleeve, her body frail, but her heart beginning to beat with something other than fear. He guided her toward the cruiser, Ranger close behind, Travis shackled and snarling in the back seat. "You'll see them soon," Daniel promised as he opened the door for Rachel. "Hope and faith are waiting." Her lips trembled, her voice barely audible. "Thank you." The words were small, but in them was the weight of a mother's entire soul. At Silverwood Medical Center, the neonatal ward was quiet, except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors. Inside the softly lit room, Mariah Cole adjusted the position of the two bassinets. She had placed the twins side by side, their tiny bodies wrapped in blankets worn by the machines. Hope's breathing was stronger now, her chest rising and falling with steady rhythm. But Faith struggled, her breaths shallow, her little chest hitching as though each inhale was a mountain toe climb. The monitor's numbers dipped, and Mariah's heart clenched. She leaned close, whispering softly as though her words alone might keep the child tethered. "Stay with us, little one. Your sister needs you." Then something remarkable happened. Hope stirred, her small hand twitching beneath the blanket. She shifted closer, her tiny fingers brushing against Faith's arm. It was the faintest touch, yet it seemed to ripple through the air. Faith's chest hitched again, then steadied. Her numbers on the monitor crept upward, a fragile climb toward safety. The nurse sex-changed glances, awe etched into their faces. Even Mariah, hardened by years of loss, felt tears prick her eyes. She pressed her hand against her lips, whispering, "It's like she's lending her strength." The room filled with silence. Not fearful silence, but reverent. Every soul present knew they had just witnessed something sacred. Two tiny sisters bound by more than blood, fighting together to survive. Mariah adjusted the blankets once more, her voice catching as she murmured, "Hope and faith indeed." And in that moment, she knew she would do everything in her power to make sure their mother could hold them again. The ride to Silverwood Medical Center was silent, except for the low hum of the cruiser's heater and the crunch of tires on icy pavement. Rachel sat in the back seat, wrists still trembling from fear and exhaustion. Her face was pale, hollow from fever and hunger, but her eyes, wide and anxious, flickered with a fragile light whenever she dared believe Daniel's words. Ranger sat beside her, his warm body pressed against the seat, gaze steady and protective. Every soften, Rachel reached down, fingers brushing his fur as if to anchor herself in reality. When they arrived, Daniel guided her through the sliding doors of the hospital. The lobby's brightness made her squint after the long night of shadows. Mariah Cole met them near the entrance of the neonatal intensive care unit. Her scrubs wrinkled from hours of vigilance. The moment she saw Rachel, her hazel eyes softened. She recognized the fragile mix of love and desperation carved into the young woman's face. It mirrored her own on the night she had once lost her child. "You must be Rachel," Mariah said gently, touching her shoulder. "They've been waiting for you." Rachel's knees nearly gave way, but Daniel steadied her with a hand at her elbow. Slowly, with Mariah leading, she walked down the corridor. The air smelled of disinfectant and warm machines, punctuated by the steady beeping of monitors. At the end of the hall stood a glass-walled room, light spilling through softly. Inside were two bassinets pushed close together, machines humming, blankets wrapped snug around impossibly small bodies. Hope's chest rose and fell in stronger rhythm now, while Faith's breaths came lighter but steadier than the night before. Rachel pressed her trembling palms against the glass, her breath fogging the barrier. "Hope, Faith," she whispered. "Me, Ojai Roy." Her voice cracked like a fragile branch. For a heartbeat, there was no response. Then, as though answering her call, Faith's tiny hand twitched beneath the blanket. Hope stirred as well, shifting closer until her arm brushed against her sister's. Rachel gasped, tears streaming freely. She pressed her forehead against the glass, sobs shaking her. "You're alive, my babies. You're alive." Mariah's throat tightened at the sight, and even Daniel, standing a respectful distance behind, felt something heavy lift from his chest. He glanced at Ranger, who sat tall and silent, golden eyes fixed on the scene with a dignity that required no words. It was the image of a family reborn, stitched together not by circumstance but by love, resilience, and providence. Moments later, the nurses allowed Rachel to step inside. Her hands shook violently as she reached for her daughters, but Mariah guided her with calm strength. Rachel bent over the bassinets, and when her fingers touched their delicate skin, she collapsed into sobs that were both agony and relief. She kissed their foreheads again and again, murmuring promises through tears. For the first time since that freezing night in the park, she dared believe tomorrow might exist. Daniel remained, at the doorway with Ranger, unwilling to intrude. His voice, low and steady, carried across the room like a vow. "You're safe now, all three of you." Weeks later, Silverwood gathered in its modest courthouse for the trial of Travis Doyle and his associates. The building, brick-faced and weathered, filled with townspeople who had followed the story closely. Snow still lay on the steps outside, but the air inside pulsed with the weight of justice about to be served. Travis sat at the defense table in a wrinkled suit that did nothing to soften his sharp features. His dark hair was slicked back poorly, his jaw shadowed. He sneered when Rachel entered with Daniel at her side, though the handcuffs at his wrist reminded him his power was gone. The prosecutor, Elaine Porter, a determined woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a reputation for dismantling liars, stood before the jury. She presented Travis's history, the domestic violence, the debts, the attempt to traffic his own children. Witnesses testified, neighbors, doctors, even Maybelle Grant from the general store. Each word drove another nail into his defense. Rachel took the stand as well. Her voice trembled at first, but as she recounted the night she left her babies in the snow, it grew steadier. She told of the fear, the threats, and the desperate hope that someone kind would find them. When she faltered, she looked to the gallery where Daniel sat with Ranger at his feet, their steady presence lending her courage. In the end, the jury returned swiftly. Travis Doyle was sentenced to 25 years in state prison for kidnapping, assault, and conspiracy to traffic minors. Two of his associates, including Ethan Vargo, were sentenced to 10 and 15 years, respectively. When the judge delivered the verdict, applause rippled softly through the courtroom. A rare breach of decorum, but one the judge did not silence. Travis was led away, snarling but powerless. His reign of fear over Rachel was finished. Life in Silverwood shifted after the trial. The town council, moved by Rachel's courage and the twins' survival, established a community fund to support her as she rebuilt her life. Donations came in from neighbors and strangers alike, groceries, diapers, money slipped into envelopes. The Town had decided that no child would ever be left in the cold again. Mariah became a constant presence in Rachel's life, visiting often, holding the twins with a tenderness that carried both joy and grief. "I'll be there, Aunt," she told Rachel, with a smile, though her eyes glistened. Rachel nodded, tears in her own eyes. She was no longer alone. Daniel and Ranger visited frequently, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes simply sitting with Rachel as the girls cooped and stretched in their cribs. Daniel never spoke much about the night in the park, but every time he saw the twins breathing, steady, something in him, healed from the loss of his own daughter, and Ranger, ever loyal, seemed to treat Hope and Faith as his newest charges, lying watchfully at their side whenever he visited. Spring finally arrived, slow and stubborn. Snow melted from the rooftops, the creek ran louder, and the church bells of Silverwood rang in clear air. On one bright Sunday, the town's folk gathered at the little white church for a service of thanksgiving. Rachel entered wearing a simple blue dress, her auburn hair brushed smooth. She carried Hope and Faith in her arms, each wrapped in pastel blankets, cheeks flushed with health. Daniel walked beside her in his crisp uniform, Ranger patting faithfully at his heel. Inside, the pews filled with neighbors who had followed the ordeal, who had prayed for the babies when their survival seemed uncertain. Mariah sat near the front, her smile luminous as she reached to touch the twins' hands. When the bell tolled and sunlight streamed through stained glass, Rachel felt her knees weaken. Not from fear this time, but from gratitude. She held her daughters close, whispering their names. Daniel stood tall beside her. Ranger stretched at his feet like a guardian carved from living stone. The sound of the bells rolled across the town, over thawing fields and budding trees. It was a sound of hope, of faith restored, of justice done. And for Rachel, for hope, for faith, and for the small town that had chosen to stand with them, it was the beginning of a new life. In the end, this story is more than the survival of two fragile lives. It is a reminder that miracles are not always wrapped in lightning or fire. Sometimes they arrive quietly in the form of a stranger who cares, a community that refuses to look away, or a faithful dog who stands guard when all seems lost. Hope and faith lived because love found a way, because God's hand moved through ordinary people willing to act. And in our own daily lives, we too can be part of such miracles. Each act of kindness, each moment of courage, each time we choose compassion over indifference, we become instruments of grace. If this story touched your heart, share it so others may also feel its light. Leave a comment with your thoughts and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story of hope, redemption, and love. May the Lord bless you and those you hold dear.